So this is an excerpt from Majjhima Nikaya 41. Householders, there are three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. Unrighteous conduct. There are four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. And there are three kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. And how, householders, are there three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma? It's when somebody kills living beings, when somebody takes, by way of theft, the wealth and property of others, when he misconducts himself in sensual pleasures, meaning he has improper sexual relationships. Then there are four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. When somebody lies, when they speak maliciously, so as to divide groups, divide one group from the other group, or divide the other group from the first group. When one speaks harshly, and then when they speak basically useless talk or frivolous talk. And then there are three kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma. The first one is covetousness, the second one is ill will, and the third one is wrong view. And here is the part of interest. It says, or he has wrong view, distorted vision, thus, there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, no fruit or result of good and bad actions, no this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have themselves realized by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. Those are the three types of mental misconduct. So, householders, it is by reason of such conduct not in accordance with the Dhamma that some beings here on the dissolution of the body after death reappear in states of deprivation and unhappy destination in perdition, even in hell. So, basically it's something that people might overlook, that wrong view is on the same level as these actions that a person might have overcome, and just through basic virtue and keeping the 5 precepts. But it sounds as like a very coarse or crude kind of view, like nobody actually believes that. It sounds as if it's something that everybody would have gone beyond just by becoming a Buddhist, for example. But that wrong view is actually something that is much more deeply rooted and much more... Like, basically, if you fully abandon that view, you would be a Sotapanna. So there has to be traces of that view in your experience, even if you don't outright tell others, like, no, I believe that there is nothing given, or I believe that there is no mother and no father. There is some trace of that in you, if you are not a Sotapanna. So then that... so I thought we could explore how would those views manifest, given that it's not the obvious intention to believe these things.
So shall we start with the beginning? Like, there's nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. So why is that a wrong view?
And what does that mean exactly? Does it mean to say, is it talking about like what it's really saying is it makes no difference whether you give something to someone or not. Like it's connected with the second point. Like there's no result of good and bad action. So basically, just it makes no difference. You just go through life, and it's kind of like random. Like things that happen to you are a result of just random things happening.
Or some
the world, chaos theory,
some cosmic force or other.
Yeah. And then it basically, the reason why that view is incompatible with the right view is because, I mean, the most basic point is just takes away the fact that you are responsible for your own suffering. Most important.
Yeah.
If you can't accept, it's not just like the fact that you won't be making merit because if you have that wrong view. It's the fact that it blocks the understanding of the Dhamma itself, because then you, like, how are you going to recognize that you yourself, because results of good and bad action doesn't just mean bodily and verbal action. As the sutta itself said, it talks about mental action as well. So how will you purify yourself if you don't believe that the actions that you're doing have results? It's just the most basic thing.
Yeah.
So that first one is always enough. But then what does it mean, for example, not to believe that there is mother and father?
Well, most generally, things in the world come with their own significance. And in terms of one's relationship with human beings, one's father and mother are, they have a special significance. And so it is important to recognize on the most general level things have significance, and even if there are unpleasant aspects connected with that, to not deny the significance and just see everything as basically equal, like there is no father, there is no mother, and just say, well, they're just all human beings. And you can extend that principle further, and then in the wrong way start taking things apart as if it almost doesn't exist. That would be a sort of continuation of that same wrong view. But the fact is that as an infant, you're fully dependent on, let's say, parents or caretakers generally, and without their support, you simply wouldn't have made it. And there's another discourse where the Buddha in fact indicates that it's not easy to repay what one's parents have done. And there are some telling similes there as well. So to see that is part of that right view. So then the question is, do you have a say in the significance that things have? For example, that's a good question to ask in this context. Like, am I creating the significance of things that I encounter in my world, or is that something that I sort of find myself in? Right?
Yeah, because it's not that people want. It's not that. The problem basically is that you would start denying naturally when you try to overcome suffering. The natural direction is, again, as you said, to start denying the significance of things, because the significance of things is misunderstood to be suffering, or is misunderstood to be greed, aversion, and delusion. So, for example, you would confuse the fact that there is a special significance to your parents, as you said, because they have raised you and they have, like, it just doesn't matter what you do, for better or worse. Even if you hate your parents, it's always going to have some sort of special significance. And so if you then start thinking that, being free from craving, for example, means not to, that, your parents don't matter anymore because you have no attachment, you have no concern for the world, you have abandoned all concern for the world, then you would be implicitly assuming, like, you would be overshooting the mark and seeing, oh, so I have to also deny the significance of these things in order to accomplish freedom from suffering. And then that denial extends to very subtle attitudes, like, you know, when people say, well, everything is just constantly changing, none of this really exists. Or when they try to mix Dhamma with science, like it's just atoms and subatomic particles.
Yeah, or I'm behaving the way I do because of my genes or DNA, which I inherited from my parents, so really they are to blame, which is sort of an inverted significance almost. Yeah.
Or on top of the like, oh, there's no mother, it's just a collection of atoms that I call mother. Like, you could, I guess, go the other way while simultaneously doing the exact same thing. This might be for the maybe intense meditator who's like, oh, you know, it's not actually a mother, it's just a collection of like visual data.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, like that.
Bare sense perceptions and even if you don't talk with scientific terms, if you say, oh no, that's just a perception, that's just a sight, and you might be like genuinely trying to practice the Dhamma, like because the Buddha says, see everything is just, you know, in terms of the six sense bases of the five aggregates, but you're going in the wrong way. You're using it to basically essentially try to say there is no mother and there's no father because it's just a feeling, it's just a perception. But that's on the wrong level. You have to see, yes, it is just a feeling and just a perception that has a very great significance, like compared to the other things.
Yeah.
But the point is that you need to be basically acknowledging that things have a certain significance, and then within that basis, you know, develop the practice, not like take a shortcut, basically.
So you want to uncover things rather than kind of cover things up with your ideas of.
You let it be what it is, and then you overcome your greed, your aversion, your delusion in regard to the significance
of those.
And that's a subtle distinction that people wouldn't see. So
and it's the same with, you know, acknowledging that there are ascetics and Brahmins who will realize this world and proclaim it. That too is of significance, because if it wasn't like that, then what are you even practicing, right? So to have that faith, like, there are people who see these things for themselves, and based on that actual knowledge that they have, they are capable of expounding that. If you don't have that, then where's your practice? Then either you want to become a Buddha yourself, which is again overshooting the mark, because that's not quite necessary. There already was a Buddha who has taught the Dhamma, so the goal is not to become a Buddha, just become an Arhat. That's good enough, basically.
Yeah, and connected with that, there can also be a view like that the truth is sort of like there are different truths. Let's put it that way. Like you know the when people try to mix like all the different religions and say like, you know, they're all talking about the same thing because it's
yeah, this is the I think this is sometimes called like perennial philosophy, which is the overall term which says that basically all spiritual or religious traditions, they spring from the same source and they point to the same truth.
Yeah.
Now, for many people, that's pleasing to hold that view, but why is that? Because in the end, it doesn't actually really matter what you do. As long as it's half religious or spiritual, for lack of better words, you can't go wrong. So that becomes a justification for a massive lack of discernment, because we can just do this, that, and the other, and you just think that if you just put it all on top of one another, it counts as progress.
And then you don't have to recognize the fact that no, there is right and wrong.
Yeah,
like there has to be some distinction between like not everything that you do in the name of spirituality can be considered right. Like there are things that are taking you away from freedom from greed, aversion, and delusion, which is what the Buddha described as spirituality.
Yes. Not
just anything that you might regard as less mundane than the things that you're used to. So that's the other part. Yeah. So you need to have a recognition that not just that there is a possibility to understand things, as it says that there are ascetics and Brahmins who proclaim the world after having understood it, but that as the Buddha said in one of those suttas, he said like he came to these ascetics and asked them, is there one culmination or are there many? I think that's Majjhima Nikaya 11. He said and he said if they were to answer rightly, they would say there is one combination. And then he asked, is that combination for one who is free from greed, aversion, delusion, or one who is not free from those things? And so basically, setting forth that those criteria, that there has to be that distinction basically between not just anything that you would regard liberation counts. It has to be in terms of greed, aversion, delusion. That would often not be emphasized in terms of like when people talk about religious experiences and stuff, even in the context of Buddhism. You might hear them talking about all sorts of other things except how much concern for the world and desire and aversion has been destroyed. More like I had these magical insights and stuff that I didn't have before, but that part that is kind of the goalpost or the thing that you should be aiming for is not really being addressed. So then that's another form of view that could obstruct the practice. Like, what is the freedom about in the first place, or what is the goal about?
So people might actually genuinely, on account of having some teaching or other, have an initial sense of relief, but there needs to be a further discernment than that, because indulging in sensual pleasure can also give relief, but that is going in the wrong direction. So you cannot just say, oh, I feel more at ease, or I feel a sense that the pressure has been, therefore it's moving in the right direction.
Or delighting in being, as the Buddha said, like there's different things. So then there's ascetics who, like, even back in the day, they wouldn't be crudely engaging in sensuality, but they would be getting gratification out of their views and out of their practices. So as we discussed before, and had the discussion about virtue and observances. So all of that comes within mundane right view, like having a direction of where you're actually going, like not just anything that you start with believing that that's what the Dhamma is about. You can take it for granted and start practicing with it. So essentially that would be more of you would gain, like 99% of the work is to question the assumptions that you're starting with. It's not to just go with those assumptions and then try to build something on top of it, essentially. And that's but that's more pleasant because
one finds a false sense of safety and security on the level of views, precisely.
Yeah. So that's the right thing to do, so to say, in the practice. It's that questioning of what are the views that I'm starting with? Am I, on some subtle level, not acknowledging the fact that there is mother and father, that there is action, that there are results of those actions? Am I denying that, for example, even the one we're talking about now, like that there are ascetics and Brahmins who have realized that this world and the next. Well, I've even heard some people saying that freedom from greed, aversion, and delusion is not actually possible. That because we are primates, we're human primates. Like we have these animal sort of drives, and so there are things that we can't help to. Like we can't help, for example, to have sexual desire because we are biologically wired to have those things.
I see.
Or that, so then they would confuse that with, so then freedom is not possible, basically. But then they would still be trying to practice the Dhamma, but now with like all sorts of other views that have nothing to do with it. So those are basically, all of those are essentially ways of not taking responsibility. That's fundamental.
That's the common thread that runs through that whole description. In fact, there's another sutta where the Buddha was questioning groups of ascetics, and then he was saying like, if someone holds the view that all pleasure and pain that is experienced right now is the result of what was done in the past, then would that be right view or wrong view? And then the Buddha questioned those ascetics, and they held that view. But yeah, if that's someone's view, that will again inhibit personal responsibility. And then it goes on to say, like, if someone thinks that whatever pleasure and pain they experience is the result of a creator God, for example, that's also in the end going to be problematic, because you see, if someone accepts that view, then in the end you would regard him, i.e. God, as responsible for what's happening, and not yourself. And you cannot at the same time hold the view that you are responsible for abandoning unwholesome and developing wholesome, and at the same time say that all of this is the result of some being that is basically pulling the strings behind the scene. That's a contradiction that's not sustainable.
And you can also, it doesn't even need to be God. You could have a belief, the thing I just said, that, it's this biological hormones and stuff that creates my actions.
Yeah, or brain chemistry.
Yeah, it's not me choosing to do these things. It's basically like the biology by itself is making these motions. So that's just essentially the same thing. You don't talk about God, but it is a belief that another, like something else, is doing the actions for you, and that will prevent you from actually developing yourself, because all of it, as the Buddha said, suffering is born from kamma, suffering is born from action. So then if you don't accept that there's action in the first place, then you're basically covering up the problem, so as to kind of, it's like you have a bunch of dirt in a room, and instead of cleaning it up, you just put a big tarp over it, and then
try to forget about it, basically. Yeah, but it is, you see, to some extent that might still be pleasing to people, because it takes to some extent the burden or the weight off their own shoulders. But the whole point is, as we discussed in an earlier talk, that one will be incapable of freeing oneself from suffering if one does not fully take responsibility, not just for this or that action, but for the fact that one finds oneself in the world at all. That has got to be the starting point, and then you start to work from within that situation, see if you can find a way out.
So that's again the thing of authenticity that we were talking about. It's that recognition that if you're not free, if you want to put it that way, it's your fault. Like nothing else, nothing in the world can be blamed for you not being free from suffering. Even like, if it's the most trying circumstances, like you were born in, or you found the Dhamma too late, and you already had, too many defilements or something. There's no such thing as that. Like, you always have a choice to give up greed, aversion, and delusion right now. You might not want to do it, but there's always something that you can be doing to be closer, and that's all you should be concerned with. Like, there is anything that I can do in that direction, basically. If I just lament that, something else is imposing these defilements on me and I can't overcome them, then there's nothing you can do. Like,
that's my karma is too bad.
Yeah, that's a big one. Like, especially people, because you can see like this. So this is the mundane right view, and then it's talking about there is action, there is good and bad action, and then some Buddhists generally, like, trying to have that view very much. They would believe so much in karma that they would say, well, look, I have been trying to practice for so many years now, and the reason why I'm not able to achieve enlightenment is because I have all this bad karma from the past. And so, like, I need to stop practicing, focus on making merit, so that in a future life I will be able to actually reach Nibbana. And then, funny thing is, like, people don't realize, but the Jains were saying exactly the same thing. When they were saying, the Buddha would ask them, like, so why are you doing all these more self-mortification and stuff? And then they would say, well, because we have so much bad karma, by doing this stuff, we wear away the results of our bad actions. And then the Buddha asks them, so do you see? Do you have like recollection of your past lives to know that you actually did all that bad karma? And then they say, no, we don't. And so, then in the end, what they answered was like, well, the view is simply pleasing and agreeable to us. So what this asceticism is, we find it.
And then he also asks, like, do you see I've worn away this much bad karma and there's still that much to be worn away? And they were basically completely puzzled.
This is like the Vipassana movement, their view of sankharas as being this accumulation of things that you need to erode away through your concentration practice.
Yeah, in general, like, if you believe that the defilements, I mean, the thing we often talk about, like, when you need to get rid of your thoughts, or you believe you need to get rid of your thoughts in order to be at peace, you essentially think that these things that come by themselves are responsible for your suffering. Like, the suffering is happening because of this thing is knocking at my door, and I can't. Like, if it comes, basically it's that thing's fault.
Yeah.
So you can see that's how deep the view that this not taking mundane right view goes, like just not taking responsibility for your own greed, aversion, and delusion, even through supposedly practicing the Dhamma, like through meditation and stuff. So it's that's why I started by saying it's a much more deeply rooted thing that people realize. So and like the if you like, you don't need to be worried essentially about anything else. Like, what is my view? The view that I approach this whole practice with. That should be your concern, not like, I'll just it's because I don't know this method or that method, or I haven't found out, I haven't studied enough suttas, or no, it's what are the assumptions, what are the attitudes with which you approach this whole thing, and then keep continuing to review that. But then that's like, when you have a movie, you don't want to be actually knowing that you're watching a movie. You want to get absorbed in the movie so you can enjoy the plot. And that's exactly the same thing. Like, you don't, if you keep that kind of background perspective that of questioning your motivations and attitudes while you're doing the practice, the whole thing becomes much more unpleasant than many of the sort of releases and mundane pleasure that people might get from the practice. You can't get it anymore because all that stuff requires you not to be questioning yourself. It requires you to kind of get into this hypnosis, basically, where you don't question what you're doing. You're just going in this direction, and wherever it takes you, you're blissing out, and that's it. So
and the waiting goes.
Yeah, anticipating, praying upon something. So it's
so that attitude of undoing, it's much more kind of demanding.
It takes like it's like a dissonance. Like it's not that it's going to be, agonizing pain the whole time that you start practicing. It's more like you have this little sort of noise there that's not really what you want, because it's going against the grain. That's what the Buddha said. The practice goes against the grain. So
it's also like, undermining the ground on which you are standing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the whole world is basically to be put in question.
Yeah.
The world which you inhabit and feel secure in, pleased with, and so on.
You might think it's just about, running on top of that ground to where you think you should be going. But no, it's about the fact that, undoing the ground that you're standing on.
Yes.
And that would be recognized as pleasant when you have trained your mind. Before that, it's going to be not really, like, you would have to use your discernment to keep going, like to motivate you to keep going, because the mind in itself doesn't really want to go in that direction.
Yeah.
I was thinking kind of about, like, you can almost approach it with the view that it's like this epic battle that you kind of suit up for, and you go and you fight it, and it's like this heroic, courageous moment. But like it's less. It's not so epic. I guess a good way of putting it is like a good hero's journey story. The hero does not want to be doing the hero's journey.
That's one good thing to mention, because when the Buddha talks about the 5 aggregates, he doesn't say, or the defilements in general, he doesn't say that it's like you said, like you're in a battlefield and you see the soldiers coming towards you, like you're gonna fight them head on. He gave a simile that it's like a rich householder who would have a servant who basically the servant would come to him very nicely, very politely, and start working for him, and then, but from the very start, that servant's goal was to kill the householder. So then, while he was sleeping, or when he just wasn't aware, that servant was living in his house the entire time, and then he kills him.
Yeah, so the householder came to trust the servant. Yeah. And then after a long time, he was caught off guard. Yeah. And basically stabbed him with a knife a few times.
So the all the things that you have to overcome are coming from that sort of indirect direction that you actually have trust in. The things that you think are for your welfare, they're basically the things that are right there waiting to kill you. So any sort of pleasure that you might be getting from the practice, if it hasn't given you the right view, you should be skeptical, because it is very likely that it is the pleasure of the trust in that very thing that for now is nice, for now is comfortable, but eventually it's gonna stab you.
Yeah. So there's this other sutta about the 5 aggregates where the Buddha says that one is devoured by those very aggregates. Yeah.
Actually, that's how it gets translated, but I think it actually means like I am itching with. I am itching with form, itching with feeling, itching with. The thing is, in English, that's not doesn't really make sense, but that's kind of what it means. So it's not it's coming like on that level, like this thing is itching. It's like on you, basically. It's not some sort of enemy out there. That's it's right there in your personal sort of space. That's where the whole problem is, not in anything else that you may blame for, getting rid of managing your environment, essentially.
Sartre has a play called No Exit. Basically the premise is these characters are in hell, and hell is like this very kind of mundane, you're just stuck in a room with 3 people and they annoy the hell out of you, essentially. And kind of it ends with this culmination, this dude knocking on the door. He's like, let me out, give me the chains and the fire and the torture chair. It's like anything but this subtle nagging, it's not bad enough.
That's the sort of discomfort or the dissonance of existence. When you recognize that responsibility, it's like, it's something like that. It's not like you're carrying a mountain. I think that's what we were discussing the other day. It's not like the pain of carrying a lot of stuff. It's more like you have a bunch of pointy little rocks in your foot, in your shoe. It's something like that. So it's the practice basically should not be expected to be comfortable unless you are already far beyond. So that's another view. Like, am I expecting the practice to result in pleasure as soon as possible? Or do I recognize that there is a problem here that needs to be fixed, and it's not necessarily going to be a nice ride right away? Obviously, eventually you want to be free from suffering, but you have to recognize, like anything, in the beginning, it's always a grind, so to say.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. Like what you say also, like the things with recognizing one's own attitude, like linked to what you just said, because if one doesn't recognize that, okay, I'm actually wanting to get rid of that, so I'm acting out of aversion and craving, like my whole practice is based on that, so everything that I can recognize as peaceful or as pleasant is actually within the senses. So it cannot result in anything, basically.
Yeah, and doesn't matter how peaceful it is within the same container. So then that's why if it just comes easily to you, kind of at the same time or parallel to your lay life and your possessions and your worldly engagements, and you kind of have it side by side like that, that's a good indication that this other thing is just coming basically taking place within those same attitudes that you are used to, because it didn't require you to transform your mind, your way of existing. Like, just imagine if you had a dog that was wild, and or a child that was spoiled and having bad behavior, and suddenly the next day it's like an angel. Well, you might be suspicious that there is some underlying. It didn't magically change like that. So the same thing with the mind. If you have been acting out of greed, aversion, delusion, and suddenly you find this pleasure, and it's really wonderful, and all the suffering is gone, well, you should be skeptical about that, because
so one should tell himself, like, it's quite hard, but like, I don't know what happiness is, like I don't know, like, I'm suffering and I don't know how to get out.
Yeah,
it's quite
the Buddha said the whole world sees the pleasant sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and thoughts, like phenomena, as pleasant, and the cessation, the actual thing that's pleasant, is seen as unpleasant by the world, which is the cessation of those things. And he says the noble ones are the ones who understand that as the true pleasure. So you have to understand, like, whatever I regard as pleasure, not like I have to get rid of it, because then we get into the same thing we were discussing before, like you want to deny the significance of everything, but you can't take it as the way to enlightenment. You can't assume that if it's pleasant, it's going to lead you to enlightenment. Pleasure is going to rise on its own, but it can't be taken as a vehicle. That's when, because you end up with all sorts of misconceptions, like, metta, for example, metta practice, like you assume that you just generate these pleasant feelings, and that's it. Like you're already practicing, you're
on the way to nibbana, radiating these pleasant feelings all over the place. Yeah.
And you never had to go through any sort of training, like everything just fit together magically like that. So that's just too good to be true, basically.